It was the 59th day, and the morning began as usual. His wife was getting ready to go to the store or run errands. The exact circumstances are not specified. She left her with her husband, and there was nothing new about this because it had happened many times before. He stayed alone, sat down at the computer, and launched the game. And then crying came from the crib. The familiar scenario. The very same one that had repeated time after time. Get up, pick her up, try to rock, doesn't help, irritation builds, a strike. This time he did it just like before, but the result was different. After the strike, she went quiet, as always before. Only this time the silence was somehow different, not the kind after which you can calmly return to the monitor and forget. Something had changed. Something was wrong, and he noticed it. Not immediately, but he noticed. Perhaps she wasn't moving, her skin color changed, her breathing became strange or stopped altogether. What exactly he saw, the testimony describes it sparsely, but he understood. This wasn't simply going quiet. This was something more serious. He tried to help, picked her up, tried to bring her around, did things chaotically without understanding what exactly needed to be done. But he's not a doctor. He's a 20-year-old welder who had just struck the one who came into the world 2 months ago. Nothing he did helped. Then he called the ambulance. The ambulance took about 10 to 15 minutes, which is standard for an urban call. But for Mironov, those minutes probably stretched into hours. He had already understood what happened and couldn't comprehend it. She wasn't responding, wasn't breathing, wasn't moving. Everything he tried to do was pointless. The movements of a person who, for the first time, confronted something that can no longer be undone. When the medics entered the apartment, they recorded the time and confirmed what was already obvious. By that point, there was no one left to help. He stood nearby. What exactly he told the doctors, what he tried to explain, is also sparsely reflected in the case files. But the marks on the head spoke for themselves. She was sent for a forensic medical examination. What was discovered turned the entire case upside down. The investigation initially thought it was looking into a single strike. Tragic, fateful, but isolated. However, the examination would reveal an entirely different picture. The procedure was standard, but in this particular case, it would become key to understanding the full picture. The experts worked according to standard protocol: external examination, documentation of injuries, autopsy, histology. Every stage recorded, every finding in the report. The cause of the outcome was established quickly: closed craniocerebral trauma with a fracture of the parietal bone. At 2 months, this is an injury incompatible with life. Mironov struck with his palm, and that was enough. But the experts found more than just that. During the detailed examination, additional injuries were revealed, marks that could not have come from a single strike. Marks that indicated what happened in November was far from the first time. They described everything, photographed it, and entered it into the report. Investigator Brajnikov received this document and understood that the case was significantly more complex than it initially appeared. This is not a story about one fateful strike, not about a momentary breakdown of a tired father, and not about a tragic accident. There was something entirely different here. The question now facing the investigation: how many times had this repeated? And did Mironov understand what exactly he was doing? Mironov was interrogated several times, first immediately after his detention while everything was still fresh, and then after the examination results were received. Each time, the investigator returned to the same questions, compared the answers, looked for inconsistencies. Mironov's version was simple: one time, a single breakdown. He couldn't handle his emotions. Exhaustion had built up. Young father, first experience, sleepless nights, crying coming from the crib. He couldn't take it and struck. He didn't intend to cause harm, certainly didn't intend such an outcome. It was a mistake. A terrible and unrepeatable one, but still a mistake. That's what he said on the record. Investigator Brajnikov listened, wrote it down, and asked clarifying questions. How exactly? Where? How many times? What happened before? What happened after? Mironov answered in monosyllables. One time. Open palm to the head. wanted her to go quiet, misjudged the force. This is the classic position. Admit the minimum. Explain it as a moment of overwhelming emotion. Remove any intent. Legally, the difference here is enormous between an intentional act and causing harm through negligence, the difference in sentencing, the difference in the charge, the difference in who you walk out of the courtroom as. But the investigation already had the examination. 3 closed craniocerebral injuries, not 197, 3. Marks of squeezing on the face and shoulders, injuries of varying age, and 1 breakdown doesn't look like that. Brajnikov understood that Mironov wasn't telling everything, either lying outright or unwilling to acknowledge what he had actually been doing. The psyche sometimes protects itself that way. A person suppresses what they can't live with. But the investigation doesn't need psychological explanations. The investigation needs facts, and there was a person who knew this family better than anyone else, who was there every day, who saw, heard, noticed, or didn't notice. The wife. She was interrogated separately and immediately, as a witness, not as an accomplice. The investigation quickly established that she was not at home at the time of what happened. They asked her questions carefully, understanding the situation. She had just lost the one she gave birth to 2 months ago and had just learned from whose hands exactly. What did she see? What did she notice? Were there any warning signs? The woman answered, and her voice sounded steady, or deliberately steady, so as not to break down. No, she didn't notice anything. No bruises, no suspicions. And this could very well have been the truth. Head injuries at that age are far from always visible on the outside. Brain swelling, microhemorrhages, all of this happens inside, beneath the thin skull bone, and on the outside, just silence in the crib. Not crying, not screaming, lying calmly. She didn't know, or didn't want to know. Or didn't allow herself to think what was already beginning to form into a picture somewhere on the periphery of her consciousness. The investigation left this question unanswered. Legally, she is not guilty. Didn't know, didn't participate, didn't cover up. An ordinary mother who trusted her husband and couldn't imagine he was capable of something like this. But then she gained access to the case files, read the examination report, and learned what she didn't know while living under the same roof with him. From that moment, her position changed completely. The investigation concluded, materials gathered, examinations conducted, testimonies recorded. The time came to determine exactly what Mironov was being charged with. It's important to understand one thing here. From the law's standpoint, there is a substantial difference between intended to take a life and didn't intend to, but the actions led to such an outcome. In the first case, one punishment. In the second, another. The investigation established that Mironov did not plan such an outcome. He wanted her to go quiet. He struck not to cause irreparable harm, but to stop the crying. In his mind, it probably looked like some kind of disciplinary measure, or a way to soothe, or it didn't look like anything at all, just an automatic reaction to a stimulus. But the result is the same, 59 days of life and a fractured skull. And the charge was formulated as follows. He intentionally caused grievous bodily harm, and that harm resulted in such an outcome. An unintentional tragedy, because that goal did not exist, but not an accident either, because he struck consciously, understanding what exactly he was doing. Something in between, a legal compromise between monster and tragic accident. The maximum Mironov faced under this charge was 15 years. That's the ceiling, and how much he'd actually get, that was for the court to decide. The case was sent to trial. The trial began, and Mironov took his seat in the defendant's dock, the very same person who 2 years earlier was smiling in a photo at the registry office, next to the 1,000th registered in the district. Now, in a courtroom, under guard. He was accused of actions that led to such a final outcome for the one who hadn't even turned 2 months old. The judge read out the case materials. The prosecution presented its position, and it was the defense's turn. Mironov stood and declared not guilty. Not in the sense that he didn't strike. He admitted that during the investigation, and denying it would have been pointless. But guilty of what he was being charged with. According to him, no. His version remained the same. A tragic accident, not intent. And if you believed this version, sitting before the court was not someone who caused harm deliberately, but an unfortunate father who made a terrible mistake, lost control once, and is now paying for it for the rest of his life. It sounded almost convincing, if not for the examination, if not for 3 injuries instead of 1, if not for the marks on the face and shoulders, if not for the investigator's testimony that this had repeated more than once. The prosecution had evidence, and it painted an entirely different picture. Investigator Denis Brajnikov was called to the courtroom, the very person who had led this case from the very beginning. He gathered the testimonies, studied the materials, interrogated Mironov, and knew every detail, every contradiction, every attempt by the defendant to present what happened as a one-time breakdown. The judge asked him to describe the picture that emerged during the investigation. Brajnikov spoke calmly, without emotion and without judgment, just the facts, as is proper. And then he said the phrase that crossed out the entire defense's version. This situation repeated more than once, not a single breakdown and not a one-time loss of control, multiple times, a pattern. The same thing happened every time. The wife leaves, Mironov sits down at the computer, crying comes from the crib. He tries to rock, it doesn't help. Gets angry, strikes, silence comes. He returns to the game, and so on, again and again, time after time, until one of those times the silence became permanent. Mironov himself revealed this during interrogations. Not right away, not completely, but he revealed it. The investigators simply assembled scattered fragments into a complete picture. It's important to understand the difference here. One breakdown, that's a tragedy. Multiple times, that's already a choice, a conscious choice of an adult who time after time solved the crying problem the same way. The judge listened, noted it, and moved to the next piece of evidence, the examination report. The judge took the examination report and began reading it aloud, dry medical language, terms that mean nothing to most people. But the meaning was clear even without medical training. And when he reached the description of the injuries, the courtroom went quiet. Marks on the face, on the shoulders too. A distinctive pattern, 4 points on one side, 1 on the other. That is exactly what a mark from an adult's fingers looks like when the thumb is positioned separately and the other 4 are together. He was squeezing her. He took that tiny face in his hand and clenched, grabbed her shoulders with such force that it left marks. 2 months of life, the size of a loaf of bread, bones thinner than a pencil, and a grown man was squeezing her with his fingers so hard that the forensic examination documented it. Why? So she'd go quiet? So she'd stop squirming? Or simply out of anger, when a palm to the head no longer seemed enough? Mironov sat and listened, face without expression. Either he'd learned to control it, or he'd heard these words so many times that they'd stopped meaning anything. The judge continued reading, and when he announced the next finding, that very main one, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Even those who thought nothing could surprise them anymore froze. Then she was given the floor, the mother of the one who was no longer here, the defendant's wife, a woman who found herself caught between those 2 words and had to choose who to be. She stood, looked at the judge, and said what no one expected to hear from a wife: maximum punishment. However much they give, let him serve it all. No mercy, no mitigating circumstances. No, he's a good person who just made a misstep. She did not defend him, and in cases like these, wives often ask the court for leniency. They say the husband is the breadwinner, that it was a breakdown, that he's remorseful, that the family is waiting for him. They write letters, they gather character references, they cry at hearings. She did not. Not a word in his defense, not a single plea for leniency, only a cold, firm demand. Let him answer in full. Why? Because she read the case files, saw the examination report, learned what she didn't know while living under the same roof with him, learned what exactly was happening during those half hours to an hour when she went to the store. And the one she gave birth to was left with the father. Now she knew everything. And that knowledge transformed her from a wife into the chief accuser. Not the prosecutor, not the investigator, her. That very woman who once stood next to him in the photo at the registry office and smiled. She learned the same thing you are learning right now. The judge read the verdict. 10 years in a maximum security penal colony. This is a place where people serve time for serious offenses. Not a settlement colony where people are sent for minor things, but a real correctional facility. 10 out of a possible 15. Almost the maximum. Miranatha heard the sentence standing, his face still the same without expression. Or the camera simply didn't catch the moment it faltered. Important, 97, he never admitted guilt. Until the very end, he stuck to his story. One time, an accident, didn't mean to.
Even when the examination, the investigator's testimony, and common sense said otherwise, he kept repeating the same thing, like a broken record. After the verdict, he filed an appeal and tried to challenge it. Too harsh, he claimed. Circumstances weren't taken into account, improperly classified. This is standard procedure. Almost all convicted individuals try. Maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe a couple of years will be shaved off. They weren't. The verdict was upheld. 10 years. Is that a lot or a little for what he did? Some will say too little. Others, enough. But the real question here is something else. Why did the court give nearly the maximum? Why didn't it believe the version about one breakdown? What was in the case materials that made the judge decide this person deserves 10 years in a maximum security facility? The answer in the examination report, in that very detail we haven't yet mentioned. Now, the main thing, what changed everything, what made the wife demand the maximum, and what made the court nearly grant it: 3 closed craniocerebral injuries with fracture of the parietal bone. 3 times that thin little bone on the crown, which at 2 months hasn't even fully fused yet, received a strike of such force that it broke. It's important you understand here what this means. This is not one breakdown, not lost control for a second, and not a tragic accident. This is a system. He turned it into a routine, a method of solving a problem. Crying? No big deal. There's a proven method. Until the moment when the method stopped working, when the 3rd injury turned out to be the last. That's why the wife demanded the maximum. She read it and understood what had actually been happening every time she left the house. The 1000th registered in the district, a milestone number, an occasion for photos and congratulations. 59 days of life. She simply wanted to be picked up, rocked, kept warm. With her cry, she was trying to say, "I feel bad, help me." He helped in his own way, and she went quiet forever. What do you think about this story? Write in the comments, leave a like, subscribe to our channel. See you next time.